So let's go ahead and scroll down to our first question. Our first question comes from Austin, and this one, I wanted to start with this one, not just because it was first, but because it's so, what about me? I have a question. Do you think this could possibly change how next school year will function? Well, that obviously is a great, great question, Austin. Certainly it's going to change how the school years function for many schools across America. Some schools, of course, have shut down in many different states. I'm not aware of what has happened in school systems in Florida outside of Pinellas County. But hopefully, if this stays at a manageable level, we might go back to school this semester, even if it's just for a day. But assuming all the grades happen the way they do, hopefully this will go back to normal. There will be lots of repercussions. I'm sure that there's a good chance that this will come back again, but hopefully it'll be a lot more manageable, more like what our flus are. But there's going to be certainly some repercussions for those of you who had to learn information that you need for the next year. You know, maybe your calculus class, you're going to need this information for next year's next calculus class. It'll all depend on how well people learn what they're learning now. So I don't see a lot of change specifically for Pinellas County schools, other school systems across the nation. It's dramatic change. You have students who could not be online. Should they be punished for not being online, held back even? So there's going to be so many, many different issues. You have students with special needs, for example, whose needs weren't met. And what are they going to do? Are they going to be promoted even when they don't know the information? You know, how exactly is it all going to... There's going to be an awful lot of issues coming out of that, Austin. Next question. Good morning, Mr. K. Here is my question for your Q&A. How much will the pandemic affect future history textbooks? A paragraph, a section, a whole chapter? This is one of my favorite questions. In fact, I like it so much that I went ahead and grabbed a couple of textbooks to kind of give that answer. And we'll start with our current textbook, the one that we use here in AP. And realize this isn't a very extensive textbook. That's why we use it. And not many students get into this level of knowledge. But if you want to kind of compare what do you think is going to happen as far as the textbooks go, well, take a look here. The 1918 flu epidemic gets a paragraph in our textbook. A paragraph. We're hoping for us it's not as bad as it was in 1918. Then you've got the Holocaust. Gets about a page. And finally, September 11th gets about a page and a half. And those of you watching this who lived through September 11th, you know, this should kind of shock you. This is all that students learn about September 11th. And it's a big, big question that we always have is how will people tell our story? How will our children and grandchildren learn about the coronavirus? How much will it get? Well, first of all, I believe this is Hannah's question. First of all, Hannah, a lot of this depends on who's writing the book, who they're writing it for, how much time has passed. The longer it's gone in history, the less time it gets in the textbooks. So, for example, the Mongol invasions, if they had been written in the 14th century, just the very next century, would have gotten an entire textbook, whereas now they get a chapter. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. In the newest textbooks, it'll probably get about a page, maybe a paragraph. It'll depend on what happens in the next couple of months. But to kind of scare you a little bit, this is not one we use at Eastlake High School, but this is just one I happen to have lying in my study here. This is a typical American history high school textbook. It does not even mention the influenza virus. It does not even mention it. So who knows what's going to end up happening? Good question, Hannah. Next question. This one comes from Sophia. COVID-19's impacts on politics. How will it affect the next election? Oh, that's an amazing one. That really is. It's still a little early to tell. If we get out of this, most people are probably going to say that President Trump will come out looking a little bit better. His approval ratings have gone up, but they've also fluctuated along the way. It really depends on how you personally experience this. You know, if you If you were less affected by it, if your business survived, you're going to have one reaction. And if you lost a loved one, if you lost your business, it'll have a very different answer to it. It's also going to depend on where things happen. Certainly New York City is extremely angry right now. Ironically, the places biggest hit, New York City, in Florida, Miami, Broward County, many of the places hardest hit are Democratic strongholds. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's going to have a major impact. Certainly those people, if you have a big hit from coronavirus, they're going to blame the president. Well, why? Because he's the president. It doesn't matter whether you had a Democrat or Republican president. When things are bad, you blame people. But in the same hand, these people in these Democratic strongholds would have voted Democrat anyway. So I don't know if it's going to have that big of an impact. But certainly, it's still a little early to tell. Unfortunately, the way we Americans tend to make up our minds is the vast majority of us make up our minds just a few weeks before the actual election. You know, I'm not talking about your hardcore Democrats and hardcore Republicans. The people who make the difference, the vast majority of us in the middle, we don't make up our minds till very close to election day. But great question, Sophia. Let's move on to Maya's question. Maya actually has two questions now. As of now, many people have lost jobs due to COVID-19. Do you think there will be a hesitancy for people to go back to a workplace environment? Well, certainly that's going to be the case. Certainly, even though I think that we are not done with this coronavirus once we're given the all clear, that you'll still get recurrences. After all, the plague lasted for hundreds of years. I do believe that this will be the worst, that when it comes back again, it'll be toned down and then toned down. As we improve our patterns, I think everyone's going to wash their hands a lot more. You know, so that's going to obviously be a big change, and there will be some people who won't go into work, but most people will, but they'll be careful about it. Her second question, I also have another question. How efficient do you think Trump's COVID stimulus bill is? I do want to be careful and not call this Trump's bill. This is one of the biggest bipartisan bills passed maybe in the last 10 years. Yeah, of course, there were some debates between Republicans and Democrats on this, but this pretty much was a bipartisan bill that Trump went ahead and signed. So how efficient do I think? I think that this is absolutely positively... This was plugging in the hole in the Titanic. This really was. This is... the iceberg has hit us and we have plugged that hole up. Does that mean the ship's not going to sink? No, I don't think so. I think we did a really good job plugging that hole up. I think the ship's going to wander a little bit. Not clear which direction it's going to go. There's still some leaks going on, if you can kind of go with my analogy. Plenty of people got injured. Some people went overboard when we hit that iceberg. Again, I hope you're understanding this analogy here. But it certainly did a lot. I want to read her quick side note, if you don't mind. I've seen on the news multiple times about supporting not only large businesses, but small local ones as well, and it reminded me of the John Maynard Keynes theory about the importance of keeping money moving. Nice job referencing John Maynard Keynes, Maya. Absolutely. There are some more questions further on about the stock market economics. Remember, as long as people are spending money, the economy will be okay. And it doesn't matter whether it's the government spending money or average citizens spending money. As long as the money is moving, there will be jobs. It's when we put the money under the mattress, it's when we sit at home and don't spend anything, or vice versa, the government doesn't spend any money, economically, that's when we have to worry. So for those of us who are wondering, what's going to happen economically? Is there going to be a recession? Yeah, there probably is going to be a recession. How bad of a recession? Well, first of all, I don't believe in any way it's going to be a depression, because what we learned in the Great Depression was that we can't just sit back and let the economy be on its own. The Fed is taking action, the stimulus bill is taking action, money will be spent that will prevent anything like the Great Depression. But a recession is possible, certainly. It'll depend on the confidence of people to go out there and spend their money. Certainly some people, as soon as the all clear is given, they're going to spend like they've never spent before. They're going to go out to eat and go to concerts, etc., etc. And then there'll be people who will do it slowly, there'll be restaurants that collapse and can't open up their doors. And there'll be other restaurants that will be able to open up their doors because of this stimulus bill. So it's still a little early to tell what the economic impact is going to be, but I do believe that the stimulus bill dramatically lessen what that impact is going to be. All right, we need to move on to the next question here. Serenity has a question, and she says, thank you. Have there been other times that the government has told us to completely stay home? Well, actually, go way back off the top of my head, I can tell you right now that the only city in Italy not to be affected by the plague was Milan. Milan ordered its gates closed, walled up, nobody could leave, come into or leave the city. And the history of quarantining is actually a fascinating one, in that the word quarantine itself comes from an Italian word meaning 40, meaning you had to stay outside of the city for 40 days. Ships would have to dock for 40 days if there was any disease on board before they could come in, bring their people and their materials in. So the word quarantine has been going on ever since trade has been going on, this idea of it. And different governments like Henry VIII walling himself up during the Black Death, or the Pope walling himself up during the bubonic plague. But in the United States, we haven't really seen a lot of this. There were some quarantinings going on during the smallpox epidemics of the 19th century, and the Public Health Act, which you can see on this quick little timeline, did actually give the government the authority. For those of you wondering, how come President Trump can do this? How can Governor DeSantis do this? Because we have passed laws giving the government of the United States the authority to quarantine. And even in the Constitution, things like declaring martial law is something that can be done. I do have to give the President some credit in that we didn't go to that step. Thank God. That terrifies me and should terrify all of you, the idea of declaring martial law in a situation like this with the National Guard marching up and down the streets. So thank God we have not felt any need to resort to that level of quarantine. So quick answer, no, there really hasn't been this kind of a quarantine nationwide, really ever in American history. Now, Kirsten, actually let me jump ahead if you don't mind, since Zach's question was similar to Serenity's question. Zach said, what were the responses to COVID-19 by governments compared to pandemics like the Spanish flu? And, you know, just jumping right off of Serenity's question there, what the government said, first of all, nationwide there was nothing, at least that I have seen in my quick research. But locally there were quarantines, certainly in big cities that were hit like Boston and New York. There were closings of theaters, closings of schools, closings of athletic events, basically closing of mass gatherings. But again, nothing ever on this level, and certainly not only locally but nationally. Kirsten says, do you think this is going to have an impact on the way other generations will do things, like how 9/11 caused increased security measurements? Wow, you just ask awesome questions. So Kirsten, really the answer to this question goes back to what I was saying earlier. It'll depend on how the debate goes. You know, how inconvenienced do we feel we have become? Do we feel like the government, like the doctors, went over the top? Or are we glad that we did what we did and we've survived this? So as we come out of the coronavirus, that will certainly define the future generations, and there will be something. This will cause something. We either will feel like government did the right thing, or we will feel like our rights have been impacted. And as always, as I have always said to you in class and to anyone I meet, I hope we stay away from the extremes. We certainly don't want this to become a dictatorship, but at the same time, we don't want to have bodies in the streets like the bubonic plague, because nobody does anything at all about the quarantining or anything like that. So certainly it will have an impact in that way. Scrolling down some more, I know we're getting a little bit impatient, so we're going to try to cut some of this off. Feel free to pause this whenever you want. If you're a little tired, and move on. Hannah asked another question later on, kind of a humorous one here. How do you think the hoarding of toilet paper and other supplies will impact the economy? It could really go in any direction. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact. I've actually kind of wondered why the toilet paper companies haven't met up the production by now and really taking advantage of this obsession we have with toilet paper, which none of us still really understand why we're all buying it. So it's going to actually cause a lag. Certainly, when this is all done, we probably won't buy toilet paper again for a while. So the toilet paper companies are going to need to kind of realize that, okay, let's make all of our money right now. It reminds me of the little biblical story of Joseph and the famines. You know, let's take all of our money right now. The toilet paper company is probably thinking, let's put some in the bank, because we all know that next year no one's going to be buying toilet paper. So it'll depend on how they go, and that's going to have an impact. You know, when the banks take the money the toilet papers have made and then loan that money out to people. So I don't think it's going to have some massive impact, but it will have an impact. You guys are asking such wonderful questions, and they're all little variables that gather together to really create all kinds of crazy futures that are very, very hard to predict altogether. Now, Mason, of course, asks me always very challenging questions. In fact, Mason's question was so challenging that I went to our resident economist specialist, Mr. Meisner, and emailed him before I gave this answer. Mason says, "Hi, Mr. K, here's my question. Over the past few years, we've had historically low interest rates, now cut even lower due to the pandemic. And well, as large stimulus packages being supplied by the federal government, classical economists would argue that this would be a recipe for disaster and high inflation. But we're all well into this crisis, and this runaway inflation doesn't seem to be happening. What will historians and economists say about this time period and how the pandemic has affected the economy compared to other similar events?" And Mr. Meisner's quick response was, "The Fed did the same thing during the Great Recession. The key is that there is no inflation. It will be interesting to see what happens." And I have to agree with Mr. Meisner on that, not trying to wash away your question, Mason. It is a wonderful question. But as I was saying earlier, we've learned an awful lot from the Great Depression. I mean, the entire AP Economics and AP Microeconomics courses, almost all of the content for those courses has been written since the Great Depression, as we've learned what economies do. And so the Fed is very key on keeping away from this runaway inflation. And I guarantee you that as soon as it looks like inflation is starting to happen, they're going to pull back and start raising interest rates again. So I'm not that concerned. This certainly will be in effect. It'll be another one of those blips, but it's not going to be a huge spike like we saw in the 20s and 30s as far as economics go. Getting near the end here, Hunter asks, with the economy declining, are we going to see another boom depending on how bad this really gets? So Hunter, I think what you're getting at is, will this have a positive economic effect? Yeah, certainly it could. People are going to make interesting choices as to how they spend their money now. Netflix stock is probably doing really well right now. Will we spend less money on entertainment? Will we be going to parks more now? Will we not spend as much money? That could happen. So certainly that could be an effect causing a recession. Is we're going to come out of this, at least some of us, with a little bit more weariness, a little bit less likely to spend that extra money. At least some others of us will go out and shop to our heart's content because, oh my God, I can't remember the last time I was at the mall. So again, it's psychological. It's not economic. It's psychological. And those are two sides of the same coin. Casey said, how long do you think it'll take for the stock market to recover? That's a tough one, Casey. I would say that one, I would give it, to get back to where it was before the coronavirus, I'd give it anywhere from probably a year to 18 months to start getting close to where it was before. It could be as long as 3 to 5 years. It all depends on where this recession comes from. It's not going to be right away. So hopefully nobody here has stock that they need to cash in now. Hold on to it. Wait and see what happens. Okay? Unless you have stuff like, if you have stuff that's risen like Netflix or something like that, who knows? I'm not a stockbroker. Julia has a habit of giving me questions that are always really tough to answer. Thinking questions, deep questions, sometimes questions out of left field. So let's see what she has to say. Here's my question. As we know, this isn't the first time humanity has encountered some sort of pandemic in the past. However, it's not the first time students were forced to leave their school because of some sort of occurrence. For example, the world wars. I've always wondered what happened to students after World War I and II. Did they ever go back to school for their education, or did they just stop completely? If the younger generation never came back, did that somehow affect their lives after both world wars? Wow, like I said, what a wonderful question, Julia. And I'm going to be straightforward. The research is still out on that one, and that is pretty much an individual answer. There was something after World War I called the GI Bill. Sorry, World War II. Did I say World War I? World War II. Which changed America dramatically. And gosh, you AP US students were just about to learn this before this all hit. And what it did is it gave all of our vets pretty much free access to college education. And it changed the middle class like it's never been changed before. So almost everybody coming back from World War II went on to school and got more of an education. So as far as grade school goes, you know, you need your high school diploma. And your high school is only going to give you that diploma if you've met the requirements. So all of these students in schools in LA and other places, they still need those diplomas. You seniors, you're going to get a diploma, so keep working. That diploma means something. If we had closed school, you know, a week or two ago, you would need to come back to get your diploma. So not a lot of change, Julia. Obviously, some people are going to take advantage of that. And then, is this our last question? Yeah, it looks like it. Our very last question, Serenity says, throwing in another one late in the day, you'll notice. Also, do you think that this will impact our foreign relations and trade with other countries like China? I also remember you saying in class that many times when we give the government new powers, we don't get it all back. Do you think they will put in place new preventative programs that will impact our way of life? Whew. That's a tough one, Serenity. Certainly the entire planet is going to take another look at trade and immigration. This is not a good time for this, of course. We're already on the heels of Brexit, of the Syrian refugee crisis, which is still going on. We have President Trump's wall, of course, and the issues there. So there already is an anti-immigration attitude planet-wide. And this is only going to make that worse, because obviously, that was one of the first people quarantined, by the way, were immigrants, especially in the early 20th century. So that is definitely going to have an impact there. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on foreign relations. I think that most logical people won't put blame on any one particular country. Even China is not going to completely be some kind of pariah after this. The Chinese are too powerful and too important for that to be the case. But the UN will have whole new discussions about this. Who knows what the World Health Organization, how it's going to respond, how it's going to change. Trade will continue. We need trade. Let's just jump back to history, of course. And this is a really good place to end this. Do you know what the bubonic plague ended up causing? Not right away, of course. But not only did trade revive right after the plague, and pretty quickly afterwards, but the bubonic plague, most historians have said, not completely on its own, but certainly played a huge role in ending feudalism. Some have gone on to say it's that ending of feudalism which sparked the Renaissance. So think about that for just a second. Some would argue, and I can make that argument, some would argue that the bubonic plague caused the Renaissance. And then the Renaissance, of course, what did the Renaissance cause? Oh, I don't know, exploration, the discovery of America, technology, industrial revolution, everything we have today came out of the Renaissance. We're still in the Renaissance studying humanism, and the Renaissance wouldn't have happened without the bubonic plague. Really makes you think. What's this coronavirus going to do? Only time will tell. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this Q&A session. I know I've gone on a little bit long. Maybe you separated this into 2 or even 3 different videos. But I hope I've helped you feel a little bit better, understand a little bit more, answer some of your questions. If nothing else, I've taken up some of your time. So, stay safe, stay healthy. TTYL.